Hey guys, Pete here. This will be my Watchmen Episode 6 recap with thoughts about what we just learned. Episode 6 was titled This Extraordinary Being, which was an excerpt of Hollis Mason's description of Hooded Justice in his in-universe book Under the Hood. The episode was directed by Stephen Williams and written by Cord Jefferson and Damon Lindelof. We go back in time to live Will Reeves' memories through his granddaughter Angela Abar, who took his bottle of pills at the end of the last episode. Will's origin story turns out to be the origin story of Watchmen itself. The story of how people started wearing costumes and masks to fight crime, which is what altered the history of the universe that the show exists in. The reveal that Will is Hooded Justice worked, even though I was somewhat skeptical about it when the theory first popped up. Before we go down the rabbit hole with Angela, we do get a version of the story of the Minutemen through the in-universe TV show, American Hero Story Minutemen. We find out that Agent Dale Petey's concern about the show being inaccurate are spot on as we watch the fictionalized interrogation of Hooded Justice. I like how this plays out in that we're all wondering if it's going to be a black man with white makeup around his eyes, even though we know it's not. The show inside a show's shocking reveal seems to be that Captain Metropolis was having an affair with J. Edgar Hoover, which may or may not be true, but through Angela's experience we find out what's really going on with the Minutemen. Will Reeves witnessed the race massacre in Tulsa as a boy, which is how episode 1 of the HBO Watchmen series opened. He was also present when Chief Judd Crawford hung himself, which is how episode 1 ended. In 1 hour, episode 6 fills in what happened in between to start him on his journey that gets him to the point where he hypnotizes Judd under that tree. We start at a police academy graduation in 1938, and we get this shifting perspective as Will and Angela take turns playing the point of view role. This technique underlines the idea behind nostalgia and connecting the present with the past. And it's the closest thing to walking in someone's shoes that you could imagine. We don't know how Will ended up here from the field outside of Tulsa, but we do learn that the baby he found there turned out to be his wife, June. June plays the part of painting the picture of who Will has become, while his chosen profession of a police officer paints what he's up against. The violence he experienced and the loss of his family at a young age have made Will an angry man, according to his wife, but his love for Bass Reeves drove him to pursue his dream job of being a cop. As he takes in a man for casually lobbing a Molotov cocktail through the window of a Jewish delicatessen, we get a look into the vast and insidious conspiracy as other police officers take over the investigation and the man goes free. Later, the same dirty cops with ties to the Cyclops group, which appears to be a sort of extension of the Ku Klux Klan, beat Will up and stage a lynching before cutting him down at the very last minute, all to instill fear in him and keep him in line, saying, "Keep your black nose out of white people's business." The fact that we see Angela on the ground really emphasizes the generational effects of this kind of terror. After the incident, Hooded Justice is born and Will decides to put the hood back on before he intervenes, saving victims of an assault he happens upon on his way home. This is huge in relation to the canon of the story as it relates to this show. And as mentioned, I think it actually works. Will deciding to put on the hood in the moment works just as good as any explanation of how this craze actually started. He's a man dealing with trauma that he has to hide, and he's obsessed with justice. He can't realize this justice through normal avenues, so he takes matters into his own hands. With the advice of his wife, he paints around his eyes to appear as a white man under the hood, and with that, costume adventuring is born. If you've never read the original comic, this does actually track with what was known about Hooded Justice, because there wasn't much. While it probably wasn't Alan Moore and David Gibbons, the original creators' intention for Hooded Justice to be a black man in whiteface, it was their intention for his identity to be a mystery. What is known about him comes from Under the Hood, which is an in-universe book written by the second costume adventurer, Hollis Mason, aka Night Owl. Based on this version of the story, it's very possible Hollis didn't have much to go on in relation to who Hooded Justice was when he wrote that book, rather than it being that he was trying to cover something up. In this week's PDpedia files, we get his reaction to the reveal, which is pretty fantastic. Agent PD writes, from a historian's perspective, the discovery of Hooded Justice's true identity as Mr. Reeves significantly reframes our understanding of the history of masked vigilantes in our country. It forces me to confront my own biases. It never occurred to me to consider that Hooded Justice could have been anything other than a white male. As Athena sprung from the head of Zeus, so did the modern phenomenon of costume vigilantism from Hooded Justice. For a century, his secret identity is the only one that has remained unrevealed, and now we know why. It seems clear that Mr. Reeves did not hide his face for purposes of showmanship or pageantry, but for his own survival. What I love most about this is the way American Hero Story, which is based off Under the Hood, acts as a mirror in how the story is reflected in popular culture. The event that really kicked off the whole idea of costume adventuring was the incident at the market. In the show, we've now seen two different versions of how that played out. One where Hooded Justice jumps in through the window to save the shop owner and customers inside from criminals, and the other where he jumps out of the window to get away after he beats up the Klansman in the back room. The release of Action Comics #1 and the reporting in the newspaper on this incident is what convinced Hollis Mason that he had to become the world's second costume adventurer. And I really enjoyed how it was based on something that was completely misinterpreted. After that incident, Will is eventually approached by Nelson Gardner, aka Captain Metropolis, who's putting together the Minutemen. Nelson, like all of us watching the show, has a theory. His theory that Will is the cop who is feeding Hooded Justice his information turns out to only be part of that story. The two get to know each other, they end up hooking up, and Will becomes one of the Minutemen. The idea of them being secret lovers was hinted at in the original story, and we see how that came to be in this section. Will's motivation to bring down the Cyclops turns out to be incompatible with the Minutemen's goals, though. As he discovers a conspiracy to use mesmerism to incite black-on-black violence after an incident in Harlem, this turns out to be a little bit more than what the Minutemen want to get involved with. He arrives on the scene, he figures out what the Cyclops is up to, and then he calls Captain Metropolis for help in taking care of it and shutting them down. Metropolis says, "So the clan is using mind control. Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds?" And once again, we see what Will's up against. This is where things get interesting as far as the story going ahead. Will is confronted with the plan and the fact that they're getting away with it. He kills everyone and burns down the warehouse, and it feels like justice. What else could he do? The police are working with the group behind all this, and the Minutemen don't want to get involved. In the same way that the white citizens of Tulsa bombed and burned down the Greenwood neighborhood, Will wipes out the Cyclops' base of operations, and he takes one of their projectors with him. It's an eye for an eye type of justice that makes as much sense as something like that can, given the circumstances. Later, he uses the same technology to get Chief Crawford to hang himself. While Crawford does have ties to the Cyclops, at least in his family, this situation feels a lot more like vengeance than justice. Will does confront him about the clan robes in his closet. He doesn't have a great comeback other than they're a part of his legacy, but he is hypnotized, and because of that, we don't get a better explanation, but rather a statement that Will doesn't know what's really going on here. That opens up the door to there being more to the story that Will's overlooking. It definitely leaves you wondering if Will has made a mistake and that the conspiracy here might be deeper than what we've seen. In the end, that makes it a very fascinating episode of television. Of course, it looked great. The way they put it together was great. It's good as a standalone, but as far as the whole story, it reinforces this idea that there's rarely black and white answers to questions of good and evil. In the supplemental materials, we learned that while Angela was experiencing all of this, she's also talking, and Lori was there recording it all. That's how Agent PD knew about the Hooded Justice reveal. And what I think was one of the key scenes, Will freaks out after he sees his son trying to dress up in his costume. As he's trying to wash the makeup off his face, his wife makes her intentions to leave and go back to Tulsa clear. She says that she thought that wearing the mask would help him get rid of his anger, but it didn't get rid of it, it just fed it. That seems to be tied into what this series is trying to say. It's still a little bit early to figure out how they're going to get there from where we're at right now, but it also makes that moment under the tree with Crawford stand out. It's not to say Crawford was a good guy or he didn't have it coming, but it makes me wonder how killing him is really going to make a difference. It gets me excited to see how things are going to come to a conclusion, and I guess now we are heading into the ending of this adventure. Angela has experienced the things that got her grandfather into the position of killing her boss as close to firsthand as she could at this point. As she was going through all of that, she was talking out loud, so Lori was there recording it. They know who her grandfather is at this point. They know what happened under the tree, or at least they have an idea of what they think happened under the tree when Crawford was killed, this is a murder investigation in the main story. And we see Angela wake up in the presence of Lady Trieu, who is definitely working together with Will and whatever he has planned. We have to imagine that she knows everything that Angela knows, and that for whatever reason that made Will the person that she wanted to work with in this project. But we really can't say for sure what her motivation is. There is an article about her in the PDpedia, which I'm not really going to talk about here, but we get a little bit more of a backstory and what's probably going on with the character who she refers to as her daughter. Later this week, when I do my trailer breakdown, I'll talk about that there. That seems like a more fitting place. This episode had us look at some uncomfortable truths, and I think it did a pretty good job. I really liked the way that they connected the past and the present, how they connected Angela to Will, and I'm really interested to see what you guys think. Let me know in the comments what you think about the big reveal here. What do you think Lady Trieu and Will are going to get up to now that you've seen this episode? I think it has recalibrated some of my thoughts about what they're up to, but like I said, I think I'll get into that in a different video later this week and let this set in, because it's a pretty impressive feat that they pulled off today, and I think I want to enjoy that for what it is at this point. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll have a trailer breakdown in a couple of days and hopefully some bonus episodes to go along with that this week. Thanks for watching. I will talk to you soon.